Welcome to the Real Estate Show on KMED. December the 3rd is our date, 2016. Pete Belcastro and Joe Brett, the real estate guys, with you here today. We're both real estate brokers with John L. Scott in Southern Oregon, and we get together with you once a week here on KMED we'll talk about all sorts of real estate-related issues and topics. In 7+ years and almost 400 shows, we haven't run out of things to talk about, Joe Brett, which is always interesting to me. And we still come up with things that we've never talked about before.
And every time we have the nice people come by and talk with us, we learn some great things, and so do our listeners. That's the real key to the success here.
Because our goal of our shows is always we want you to be, of course, a smart real estate consumer. And today, historic buildings, historic homes, kind of what the status of that is. And again, it's a topic that we just haven't really talked about much on our shows over these years because it's kind of never come up. Yeah. You know, maybe that's what it is, but it's certainly with us today. Okay, so Dan Everhart is the preservation programs, manager for Restore Oregon. Dan, here, welcome to the show. Nice to have you here.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, so tell me, and also Lydia Ness is with him, and Lydia is also with the preservation program department, I guess. You two are the department, right?
Introduce you and title yourselves.
Yes.
Or whatever that is. Well, first of all, before we get going, tell us what Restore Oregon is, because, Joe, this came about because actually through the city of Medford, Carla Palladino at the planning department wrote an email to me a few months ago and said this is the group, and I had never heard of Restore Oregon, okay? And what they were doing, and if the Medford Elks building would be interested in joining up with them. And so the trustees who are in charge said, yes, let's do this and let's see what we got. So that's how our association has come with them. And of course, Dan and Lydia were in Medford this week talking about it, right? So that's where we are. Okay, What is Restore Oregon and how did it get started? And tell us a little bit about it because it's a neat organization.
Right. So Restore Oregon, it's a organization, a nonprofit, statewide nonprofit that's been active since it was founded in 1977. It was founded actually under a different name, but we've been calling ourselves Restore Oregon for about the past 5 years now. Mm-hmm. And the organization, which will be 40 next year, has worked to preserve and protect historic places around the state.
Now, you're not a government organization or anything to do with governments, right? It's all privately funded. Tell me what that's like then.
No, we're not. We work with government entities like the State Historic Preservation Office, but no, we are funded by our members and donors. Yeah. So we are able to advocate on a higher level than some of the government entities. We're able to go to bat more and advocate for historic places.
Advocate for historic places. You think how many that there would be, Joe? You think a lot of. Think of how many historic buildings are still standing and how many have been torn down.
We were in the company of George Kramer, who's our local historian here, and really the encyclopedia of Southern Oregon. Yeah. And just in some of the side conversations that I picked up with him, I learned some really interesting things about the history and how Medford has developed. And you've told the story a lot of times that the Elks Building was the center of Medford, and it really is rooted in the whole history and tradition of our community.
Well, what these guys have done, what Restore Oregon did then, was they have tell me about your endangered buildings, because that's kind of what started our conversation with all of you and why you're here. That there are endangered historic buildings in our state, right?
Right. So because Restore Oregon is a statewide nonprofit, we work to educate people about historic places, but sometimes people educate us about historic places. Mm-hmm. And we started a program a half dozen years ago, which solicits nominations from the public. We get nominations from around the state of Oregon. Mm-hmm. Folks give us these nominations for places that they think are somehow endangered, somehow at risk of being demolished or neglected in some way, and or that just needs some attention drawn to them. And they nominate these places to our most endangered list. We go through a process of reviewing and vetting those nominations. We go through a process of selecting them. And then, as you said, we have a list that we announce every year. That list is capped at 15 places. Mm-hmm. And with those 15 places, or less as the case may be, with those places, we invest time and energy from Restore Oregon staff in working towards solutions to make those places more. we make them more visible around the state, and we work to take them from a place of uncertainty about their future to something that's more solid and concrete.
You kind of like nudge the process along
That's
a
right.
little bit. Isn't it kind of going, because you got to go through hoops and things, and you're kind of getting people together to help them and support that.
absolutely.
Yeah, support that kind of thing. Now, what are there are three buildings in Southern Oregon region that are on your list. Share with us those are and kind of how they got there, or what the story is behind them.
Well, we have three buildings. One is in Port Orford. It's the Lindbergh House. It was listed on our most endangered place in 2015, and actually just came off this past year. So it was a 1-year turnaround. We were really excited and happy to see such progress and
so what
action
happened?
taken.
It's a private
What role
residence.
did Restore Oregon play?
What did you do?
So our endangered places listing, first of all, it raises public awareness. So
Okay.
we're drawing attention to a resource, and in the case of the Lindbergh House, I think we can safely say that having it on our endangered places list helped us leverage the funds. We have a small amount of grant funds that we expend on every endangered place. So those grant funds were used at the Lindbergh House to assess the condition of the building so that the owners better knew what to prioritize in terms of the structure. There's major foundational issues there. It's, just a half a mile from the coast, so it's wet. It's
Now,
it's
is
a little
that a
soggy.
historic building or a historic home?
An
also?
amazing historic home
Okay.
built in the
Okay.
1890s.
Okay.
Unpainted wood shingles. It's incredible.
spectacular.
Okay.
Built by a man named Lindbergh. His descendants still own and live in the house.
Wow.
And so the Lindbergh House, after this assessment was done using our seed grant funds, then what we were pleased to see happen was that the city of Port Orford got engaged. By the way, the city of Port Orford nominated it to the endangered
city did.
places
Okay.
list.
All right.
And then the city, after the results of our study, the city actually applied for some additional grant funds from the state of Oregon, which they were successful in getting. So they got a $20,000 grant, which will now be matched by the owners of the house.
Wow.
So they'll have a
Jeez.
$40,000 project that they'll invest. Now that $40,000 will disappear pretty quick.
Sure.
But it's a really good start. And because of that progress, because of the progress we made in assessing the condition and the needs of the house, and then the pretty quick progress made in finding funds to at least start help addressing that, we were happy to say that that's a place that's gone from being endangered to being on its way to saved. So
Outstanding. That's
we've
great.
taken we don't take all the credit, but we take some credit for drawing awareness and pointing them in the right direction
and providing
kind of
funding and
Right.
connecting
Right.
dots.
Right.
Yeah, you're a facilitator
That's
for
right.
for all the groups that need and entities that need to come together to save a place like that.
And that's really what we see ourselves as. We don't have the funding, the resources. We're member funded, by the way. So that's one of the ways we get funding. But we don't have the resources to give people the money that they need to complete a full renovation,
right.
restoration.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
What we do is we act as a conduit for information.
You bet.
We connect people with programs. We connect people with other people and contractors and entities who can help them in the process of preserving their historic places.
Absolutely.
That's amazing that you're member funded. What was the impetus in 1977? I know you're 40 years old because my 40th year high school anniversary is coming up next year. But how did that start? And who were the founders or who got that ball rolling and grew this into a statewide entity that now can come into all these communities and bring this great help to these historical buildings?
Well, I won't tell you. I can't tell you about the specific individuals involved in the founding, which happened to be before I was born. But the founders of the organization were not alone. There were entities across the country. A lot of them were spurred by the National Bicentennial. So 1976, the
Right around
National
there.
Bicentennial, and there had been a series of laws and policies affecting historic places that had been enacted around the nation. In fact, national laws passed in 1966, for instance, to protect historic places, draw awareness to them. if you've ever heard of something called the National Register of Historic Places, that was created in 1966. So there is a series of programs and policies at the national level and then the National Bicentennial in 1976, which spurred organizations like Restore Oregon to be founded to work towards the preservation of historic places. So I couldn't tell you the exact story of the founding of the organization, but that's kind of the national picture that was affecting.
That was the impetus
that was the picture where everybody was kind of in this mode of thinking about history and culture and what was important, and frankly, what was being lost. Because until the 1970s, or a little bit before the 1970s, the mid-century of America, in the 20th century.
60s were not good at historic buildings.
Right. Where never before had there been a push to demolish as much for as little as there was in the 1950s and 60s. Car culture became really important to Americans. And where did you go? If you were going to go downtown, you had to have a place to park your cars. All of a sudden, the quote need for demolitions was much higher. And so a lot of the federal laws and policies that were established directly in reaction to the American car culture, which was seeing an incredible impact on historic places. And then the nonprofits and even some of our state and federal agencies were established in direct response to those issues.
During that time.
Interesting.
Now,
what was Restore Oregon's original name?
We were called the Historic Preservation League of Oregon.
Interesting.
And most people didn't call us the Historic Preservation League of Oregon. They called us by our initials, the HPLO. And you'll still find people around Oregon who refer to us as HPLO and who know us by that name. And about 5 years ago, our executive director, Peggy Moretti, felt like Historic Preservation League of Oregon might sound a little unattainable for average people, and brought to the mind, something about exclusive women's clubs or something. And so we wanted to make a change in the name to reflect how we felt about historic preservation, which is really that it's an accessible and important part of everybody's existence.
Absolutely. We're talking, by the way, with Dan Everhart and Lydia Ness from Restore Oregon today on the Real Estate Show. Now, you talked about the Lindbergh House up in Port Orford as one of those buildings. You got two more. So one of them, what's the next one? The caves, the Oregon Caves, right? The big chalet there.
Absolutely, yeah. Oregon Caves and Cave Junction. We actually just met with Sue
Dinsmore.
Okay.
Who's the executive director of the Friends of the Oregon Caves and Chateau.
All right.
And Sue and her team are doing amazing things to raise awareness about frankly the lack of investment on the part of the Park Service
in the chateau,
in the buildings, not just the chateau, because the chateau itself has needs, but several of the buildings around the chateau in this larger district. Of course, the caves themselves are a natural. A natural structure, and they see thousands of visitors every year. But arguably, as important to the visitor experience are the historic buildings built up around the entrance to the caves. Okay. The chateau is where you, as a guest, can rent a hotel room and spend the night or two or three. At the caves, there are other structures all around the chateau, which for frankly, decades have been underfunded by the National Park Service. And the Friends of the Oregon Caves and Chateau, in conjunction with the National Park Service, have worked to raise funds, to raise awareness. And part of raising awareness for the Friends was to nominate their site for listing on our most endangered places list.
And that makes actually perfect sense to do that, too. And it certainly draws awareness for a unique place. Okay, the third one is, Joe and I mean, all disclosure, is the Medford Elks building downtown, which we have listed now a year and a half, and we have a lot of interest in it, but hasn't sold yet. So that building got on there, too, which is great. I think it's an important step to save it.
Yeah, absolutely. As you mentioned earlier, Carla, with the city of Medford, nominated the building, and we saw it as, it's a vital part of downtown that needs revitalization, and it's as you said, the heart of downtown. So we saw not only the need for this specific lodge, but this greater issue of fraternal lodges, not only in the state of Oregon, but around the country, is of what to do next, and just other steps to keep these buildings viable and active and usable. So we're hoping that through this and future, we can use this as an example and prioritize.
Yeah. What a contrast today as we toured the Elks building with the City of Medford planners and you folks. Mm-hmm. And we walked out onto that little roof access out on the south side. And here's the new Lydia corporate headquarters right across the street from us, in the Parks blocks and the Commons there. And then here's this beautiful historic building. That's the future of Medford, and that's the history of Medford. Those two need to stay right there together to really tell the story of where we've been and
that's why the Medford Commons was put in there for that. I hope. We'll see if that works. So anyway, we're going to continue more with here. We're talking with Dan Everhart and Lydia Ness from Restore Oregon here on the Real Estate Show today on KMED. Don't forget, check out all of our past shows. They're available free to listen to at realestateshowOregon.com. Real Estate Show rolls on KMED. December the 3rd is our date. Pete Belcastro and Joe Brett, the real estate guys, with you next week here on the show. Trevor and Gina Boucher from John L. Scott will be along with some appraisers, and we're going to talk about the issue of appraising right now of real estate transactions across our area, and the news is not good. I mean, I don't know what else to say.
Talking about appraising, or the issue of lack of appraising taking place in appraisers.
It's just remarkable. And here we are in winter almost, this kind of thing, and the demand continues in the real estate market. Rentals we had last week with Danielle Roberts and Hillary Rufai from Sterling West, and the issue of rentals and the issue, how they parallel each other, is truly remarkable. And we're seeing no let up in sight, that's for sure. Today here on the Real Estate Show, we're with Dan Everhart and Lydia Ness from Restore Oregon. So far, we've learned, Joe, there's 3 buildings in the region that have been on this, or the list right now. We're going to talk about some others that have come off the list as well around here. Endangered building, the Medford Elks building, the Chateau. And you're right, the Chateau is not going to be torn down over there at the Oregon Caves, but you want to help it. You want to draw attention to it and privately to help it, because it needs some help. The government's not doing it. And the third one, of course, was the Lindbergh House, which was a private residence in Port Orford that has been taken off the list because the building has been kind of repurposed, it's been saved, kind of thing.
Restore Oregon has restored its vision and its hope for the future.
All right. So Dan, just before we get off the Medford Elks building, your impression of that, you guys, what did you think of it? Can that building be saved? I mean, do you think it's got a future? It's been there for 102 years now. I mean, what do you think?
If Medford can't find something to do with the Elks Lodge, I don't know what they can find something to do with. I mean, that is an amazing building. It has amazing public spaces. It has architectural detail that you're never going to find in new construction. Mm-hmm. And frankly, it contributes to the vibrancy, or could contribute to the vibrancy, of downtown. Absolutely, this building can and should be repurposed. And I think we're going to work together as hard as we can to incentivize and find avenues for that renovation, restoration to happen. And it's probably not going to happen overnight. No, but we're gonna work hard to see that we can make some progress there, draw awareness to the building, and frankly, telling the story of the building and the story of its value to the community, I think, is a big part of that.
I like what Joe said about blending in that old buildings and new buildings with the Lithia headquarters and the new. There's they've repurposed that next to it there. What is that? There's going to be a brewing place going to open pretty soon. So that's been happening around there. So it just seems, I agree with you. It seems like it's such a great spot, and hopefully, with your help, with Restore Oregon's help, those interested with it are going to be able maybe to see it come
I'd love
through.
to see Dan's reel from his camera this morning.
Because
Dan poured over that building pretty well, and he was back in all the nooks and crannies, and he was seeing. I watched you find the detail in some of the columns and some of the things like that that were really put that historical stamp on things. You just don't see that anymore.
Well, it's important to remember that some of the aspects that make historic structures valuable and interesting are those details, the craftsmanship, the willingness and ability to put labor into your product that was true 100 years ago. is not really true anymore.
Right.
And
architect's drawing are
Right.
not are a whole lot different than Frank Clark
Right.
did when he designed that Elks building too.
we build buildings today with a 30-year lifespan, and we put materials into those buildings that have a 30-year lifespan. And frankly, the same was not true 100 years ago. We were building buildings to last, and the materials we were putting in those buildings were of a higher caliber and a higher grade, and the craftsmanship that went along with it. So those details, details matter, and they pay they pay homage to the people who lived back then and who worked back then, and they make these places that we're interested in that much more significant.
Now, you've also visited with another building, with the people with the building that is being restored, and that's the Holly Theater, right? I mean, that's the biggest project right now.
That's
isn't
the
it?
signature project
in Southern Oregon right now, correct?
Right. Oh yeah, by far. I think I think our friends over there at the Holly would agree. They think it's the most important project, and I won't argue with them. The Holly is an amazing place, and if you've had a chance to go through it, I think they're having tours today, actually, on the property, and you can see some of the progress they've made. But you can also see they've got a ways to go. They're still in a fundraising mode to get the last dollars they need to put it all together, because once they start work, they want to do the whole darn thing.
Right.
And I have to tell you, the quality of some of those details that they're going to be putting back in is amazing. If you haven't been into just the lobby, you should go just to see this amazing carpet that they've had recreated. It's a wall-to-wall carpeting that they've had recreated in the lobby. It's in these amazing vibrant colors, red and yellow and blue, and it's just fantastic. The entire thing was designed around a theme when it was first constructed, and the building is amazing, and they're doing great work.
Now, did Restore Oregon? Did you have something to do with that also? Did you place the building on your endangered list, kind of thing like that?
It wasn't on the endangered places list. The interaction that we've had with them is through our work statewide with historic theaters. So we've been working over the course of the past couple of years, and it will continue to raise awareness about historic theaters across the state. And that, frankly, that began with interest from another regional site that's very significant, the Egyptian Theater in Coos Bay. And so the Egyptian Theater was one of our very first endangered places. And you might recall that it was closed by the city. It was declared a public hazard.
Yes, it was. I remember that.
And we worked with our friend George Kramer, who you already mentioned in the show, and through the endangered places process and a lot of hard work and effort by the friends in Coos Bay, they restored that theater and they made it a usable, workable, viable part of the community.
And come down 101 at night when the Egyptian Theater is lit up in Coos Bay. It's right across from Benetti's, the restaurant there, and it's fabulous.
Right.
It really is.
So that's where our interest in the theaters began. Was with our work with that endangered place there.
Because there's lots of
the memories
historic theaters around the state. And as you say, fraternal buildings like Elks, Moose, Eagles, things like that.
How many lives were touched through those buildings?
And those buildings have purpose still, don't they? They really do.
Well, and the Egyptian Theater is actually kind of a star child for us, because they just won one of our, what we call a DeMuro Award, that honors preservation projects around the state that revitalize and really, transform these buildings to make them viable and usable. So they went from our most endangered place to now on the complete opposite end. So that's
and your goal is to get them off the list. You want them off the list.
And what takes place there now? What did the renovation accomplish? Is it a movie theater again, or
they do all kinds of things? I think they do show movies. They also have certain live performances. And I think they're kind of a general community space now, but they do all kinds of activities there. The great thing about historic preservation is everybody has a story to tell about a particular building that touched them, and something that something that was important in their lives and their communities. And often often those historic places are touchstones in the community. They're places that people come to. It's the church, it's the school,
Yes,
it's the theater,
all right.
and it's the private homes, frankly, too, that are part of that story.
And look how successful the theater renovations in our region have been. Think about that.
Reading.
You got the Egyptian, or you got the Cascade in Reading.
Right.
Okay. You've got the Holly coming here.
Right.
We've had the Criterion Theater's
Criterion's
been
a
redone.
beautiful
Go over to
facility.
Klamath Falls. The Esquire Theater's now the Ross
Right,
Raglan.
right,
Which
right.
is a community use just like the Egyptian is.
Right.
So we've actually saved some of these, haven't
Big
we? When you
time,
start
yeah.
thinking about that.
I have to tell you, looking back much further from than the theater in Coos Bay, Restore Oregon's one of its claims to fame actually was back in 1989. Of course, our days under a new name, and we'll tell you that story later.
You're going to have to wait till we come back from our break to hear that story.
We might have to have a George Kramer show too. Just
Yeah.
George
I
for an
also
hour.
want to ask you in our last segment
Work
about
it.
historic homes, because people live in
Yeah.
historic homes.
Yeah.
Are they still? Is it still something that we should cherish as a community as well? Anyway, we could go on for hours, couldn't we? Here, the Real
Good
Estate
stuff.
Show here with Restore Oregon. We're coming right back to KMED right after this. Real Estate Show rolls on here on KMED. December the 3rd is our date, and thanks for joining us here. Pete Belcastro and Joe Brett, the Real Estate guys, with you. It's really interesting as we go along here. What's happening around here, Southern Oregon, as we head into December? And whatever you do, we had Thanksgiving weekend last week. The Civil War was last week, and we had a terrific. Anyway, whatever it is, do something nice for somebody, huh, Joe? A random act of kindness for somebody. This Christmas season would be really, really good. That's for sure. Okay, we're talking here today with Dan Everhart and Lydia Ness from Restore Oregon here on the Real Estate Show as we continue our discussion. And there's so many things. I do want to talk to you about one other building before you get out of here. The Sparta building, downtown Medford. You were involved with that too, weren't you, Dan? A little bit.
A little bit.
A little bit. It's a success story.
We gave him an award. We
Okay.
gave him an award last
did.
year. One of our Demiro Award winners for the work that they did to rehabilitate that building. But I don't want to leave your listeners hanging because I left you with a teaser about what we did in 1989.
Right, I was going to say that's what you've been known for this.
Yeah, and in 1989, the Park Service closed the Crater Lake Lodge, and they said it was structurally unsafe, and I'm sure it was. And there was talk about whether or not the lodge would ever reopen, whether it'd be demolished,
or it would be moved back or down by park headquarters, stuff like that, away from the rim.
And so one of the high points of the work that we've done over the last 40 years was to raise public awareness about the need to preserve and restore the Crater Lake Lodge, and I think that's one of our lasting legacies in the state. And it just happens to be part of the story of Southern Oregon. So I just want to throw that out there. We work with places all over the state, and some of them are less known. You know, the Lindbergh House in Port Orford is not a household name, but some of the places that we've been involved with have a pretty high name recognition value, and something like the Crater Lake Lodge is something that we've been involved with, and it's part of the value that preservation brings to the state of Oregon.
Yeah, and that's a building. My folks honeymooned there. You know that 1947. I mean, so that building and saving it was a big thing, and I'm glad that actually happened out of this whole thing. What about? Let me ask you just about historic homes. I know you don't deal a lot with that, but are they still around the state as you go around? Because a lot of people in our valley live in historic homes, and they could qualify for the National
Historic
Register,
districts, yeah.
or they live in a historic district.
Right.
Are those things still important out there that you see around?
Absolutely. I mean, there's a huge percentage of our historic towns and communities that have historic residential neighborhoods as part of them, and those places are important, and they add to the value that we all share. And so there are lots of opportunities for people who live in historic properties. If they qualify, they can be listed in the National Register. That comes not just with kind of an honorific title, but it can come in Oregon with opportunities to get a tax break. So there's a program, the Oregon Special Assessment Program, which actually freezes property tax value as long as you complete a process with our friends at the state government in Salem. So owning a historic home is not just it's not just a challenge, and it is, but it can come with some benefit. It can come with some reward for for the good work that homeowners are doing to preserve and protect these historic places. Many of them, many of your homeowners in historic places consider themselves a caretaker. They see the value that has been passed forward to them from generations before, and they see themselves as a caretaker of that value to pass on to future generations.
Much as the stewards of our land and their rural properties.
Right. People who own Joe, you got another good point there. That's actually a good one here today, because that is a good parallel.
It's caught me on a good day.
You're on a roll.
No, but that's true. We talk about that with landowners in that they preserve and how much they love their properties.
Right.
And they would,
and
the same way with
best
historic homes.
practices to complement their neighbors and to work together and all of that. Yeah.
And the value of historic homes seems to retain its value. Especially as they're remodeled over time, and they're lovely homes, and there's certainly a lot of them. Think about that. How many are in Ashland, East Medford, Jacksonville, Grants Pass, even Klamath Falls got a lot of old homes that are out there, historic homes that hopefully people will continue to make them better, right? And be good caretakers of them. Well, before we get out of here, Restore Oregon, you are a membership-based organization, Dan.
Absolutely.
So tell us about that and how people because we have a lot of people. Well, let me tell you, when the Medford Elks Building had an open house a year or so ago, there was several hundred people came through there. Yeah. And in the interest of saving that building, make it a McMinimans, make it whatever, don't tear it down was the number one thing I think that came through. All right. So
restoreoregon.org. That's where you can find information about us online. We are a member-funded organization. We don't receive any funds from the state or federal government. So everything that we do, the staff and the lights on and the phones, bills, all of that is paid for with members and donors. And I'd encourage you, if this is something that is valuable to you, to consider becoming a member or becoming a donor. It's the end of the year. You can get a tax write-off, all that great kind of stuff. And yes, we do rely on our membership to help fund the good work that we do. So coming down, our offices are based in Portland, but we try to be a statewide presence as much as we can be. So our trips to Southern Oregon, Eastern Oregon, the coast, those come on the backs of our members and their donations.
And what about you two? How did you get into Restore Oregon, and where's your passion lay that led you down the path to what you're doing today?
So I received an internship with Restore Oregon a year ago. So I moved here from St. Louis, Missouri.
Wow.
Yes. I received my bachelor's in historic preservation at a small state school in Missouri, and applied for an internship out here and received it. So I've been fortunate enough to come out here and actually have a job in my degree and what I'm passionate about, which is rare for us millennials. But
it's good. It takes young people to do this with historic preservation.
Does, yes.
We need to have.
What a great place to land, though, for what you want to do.
Oh, absolutely. I'm very fortunate.
In a great state with a lot of opportunity.
There's
historic
so
preservation, right?
Yeah. I'm a native to the Northwest. I was born in Idaho. I lived about a third of my life in Oregon, including Grants Pass. By the way, and 3 years in Grants Pass. So when this job came open at Restore Oregon about 6 months ago, I was happy to apply. I'd been living and working in Boise, and was happy to move to Portland to take a job that would allow me to travel around the state, to see important places, and to meet great people. And it's kind of my passion. So if you can get paid to do what you really want to do,
it doesn't get any better than that.
So thank you to all of our members and donors, because I can do my passionate work because of you.
And you're making a big difference in communities, and it's great work that you do. Very interesting.
Dan, Lydia, thank you. Good luck to you all. We're going to have an update on the Medford Elks and the Chateau. And we'll see if other buildings that can be preserved and repurposed.
Sometime,
we really do appreciate that. That'll do it for the Real Estate Show here on KMED for December the 3rd. Well, hey, don't forget you can check out any of our past shows at realestateshowOregon.com. Have a great week, everybody. We'll talk to you next Saturday right here on KMED, and God bless you all.
You've been listening to The Real Estate Show on KMED Radio, presented by the Rogue Valley Association of Realtors, along with John L. Scott Real Estate of Southern Oregon and Bank 34 Mortgage. For guest contact information, download our free app, or to watch a past show, visit us online at realestateshowOregon.com. This show is produced by Table Rock Productions. Join us again next weekend for Southern Oregon's one and only real estate show on KMED. And thank you for making the Real Estate Show part of your weekend.